Very good. Thank you very much, Martin. And I should add, with respect to time, it's actually not a double header, it's a triple header in a sense because I have to introduce our sponsor to you in a minute. Okay, so what I want to talk about in the next 10 minutes or so is something of an ongoing success story for the demographics user group. And is something which is documented in these handouts that you can see at reception or in the room to my right out the back, and in the posters which we'd like you to peruse over lunchtime. And it's an ongoing success story in terms of being reporting the results of the third cohort of Retail Research and Data MSc dissertations. For those of you that aren't familiar with this scheme, for the last 3 years, under the auspices of Doug, but not exclusively concerning Doug companies, we've carried out a national competition of MSc students, which are supervised by academics and a UK-based retail organisation with a modicum of pump priming sponsorship for the student from the retailers. And so the background here really is sort of classic, if you like. It could be characterised as sort of academics getting out of their ivory towers to some extent. As I've said in the past, academics love nothing more than using techniques that don't work to tackle problems that don't matter, and this is sort of something of an opportunity to be grounded in the real world. But I don't want to be too deprecating about that, when I come back in my concluding comments. But in effect, ESRC, which ultimately sponsors these projects, of course has requirements for research excellence, high impact and independent research. And so each of the topics is audited by myself or one of my colleagues at what has now become the Consumer Data Research Centre, an ESRC big data investment, and the topics are approved and then pursued by the students. And the work is typically undertaken between May and August. So it's a national prize competition. The posters, a requirement of the scheme is that the students produce a poster, which you can see outside at lunchtime, and also that a document is, a summary document is produced showing the practical problem-solving benefits. And so here there are reasons why Sainsbury's need be fairly upbeat about its sales of ghee to ethnic minorities in London, what GSK have learned about prescribing patterns, going back to what was said earlier about linking business data to open data, EasyJet's geodemographics classification, British Gas's use of smart meters in relation to fuel poverty issues, and so on and so forth. And you can see the reports on our various websites. And this is the ESRC landing page, which acts as the clearing site for topics which have been allocated in consultation between academia, Keith Dugmore working as a consultant on this, and the Consumer Data Research Centre. And these are the sort of suspects, some of the suspects that have been involved in the programme over the last 3 years. And so last year, those of you that were here will sort of see it was a good day for 2 Southampton students and one student from UCL, looking at issues of social media usage alongside scorecard data, census and location planning, and fusing different geographies for looking and understanding data. And information about these projects is on the Doug website, and information about this year's projects will be on the Consumer Data Research Centre site. And so at that point, it really falls to me to introduce our sponsor, Bruce Jackson, who's a Senior Knowledge Exchange Manager at ESRC, to present the prizes for this year's projects. And I should say we're very grateful to Sam Cockings and Jim Wright of the University of Southampton, as well as Bruce, who read and judged the dissertations. So over to you, Bruce, please.
Thanks, Paul. So, my name's Bruce. I'm here to give the prizes. There's a joke there somewhere. So, I'm going to announce two runners-up first. So, the first runner-up is Yiran Wee of UCL. Her dissertation was looking at how open data resources can be used to define composite measures of cultural identity and heritage within the UK's population. It was a dissertation with Sainsbury's. We were very impressed with this dissertation. It was achieved a lot in a short space of time. The academic quality of the dissertation shone through, and the project is already proving very valuable to Sainsbury's. Feedback from the academic supervisor and, more importantly, the business mentor was exemplary. And it was a good example of a project delivering not only economic value, but also social benefit as well. So, Yiran, if you wouldn't mind coming to the stage. Congratulations.
Could you just do a short?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you. Next runner-up is Elizabeth Townsley. This project was with EasyJet. It was a geographic segmentation analysis of EasyJet's UK customers. Again, we agreed this was a clearly well-defined project that was well executed and had a clear set of objectives. It was particularly important because this dissertation was analysing a huge data set, and the results of which raised really interesting questions for the EasyJet that mapped right across the business. It's clear that the project was of value not only to the student but to the business and also to the host academic institution as well. So a really well-defined, good project. Do you want to come up, Elizabeth? Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. And now we move on to the winner. So, the winner is Nicholas Sampson of UCL. His dissertation was with British Gas, and it was how can smart energy meter energy consumption data be used to better identify customers' needs. We all agreed that this was a very strong piece of work, which met the aims and objectives of the scheme more generally, both being in terms of excellent academic quality, but also had high impact potential for the business partner and more generally for society. The comments from the mentor and the supervisor again were exemplary. Both were saying how fantastic the student was to work with. And it's clear that for all parties involved, again, this was a really interesting and useful project. So, Nicholas, do you want to come up?
much. Yes, thanks.
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much. So I'm aware that our chairman will be sort of edging me towards the door now because it's lunchtime. But I think if we look to the future of this programme, we do now have funding to continue this programme of research for the next 5 years, and we see it as integral to building links between business and academia in a sort of in something of a seamless tradition. We heard last year from Sharon Witherspoon about the Nuffield ESRC Q-Step initiative. This really takes progresses that kind of initiative to the postgraduate taught and research programs, and there are also rumblings about progressing this to themed doctoral training centres focused around multidisciplinary issues of insight and so forth. In terms of next year's programme, because there is the certainty that it will now continue, my colleague Guy Lansley will be emailing likely suspects and potential collaborators for ideas and so forth, and we intend to start assembling that in November this year rather than the rather late slippage that we had this year, in an attempt to regularise the project life cycle. A final point, really, in terms of the mission of the Consumer Data Research Centre, and echoing the first presentation in this session about continuity, themes of continuity and change. I've now been coming to these meetings for a number of years, and of course the data economy sort of moves on, but perhaps over most of that period, the mission of DUG has remained firmly sort of what the country can do for DUG members in particular, and the retail sector in general. The opportunity now exists really to scale these sorts of one-off programs and collaborations, initial collaborations, to something much more systematic, to looking at aspects of retail data infrastructure through, in terms of this conference's theme, the pooling and sharing of data. And of course that doesn't have to be predicated solely upon what you can do for your country, sort of individually and collectively in terms of the benefits to UK PLC. But rather, as I slightly deprecatingly sort of talked about techniques that don't work and problems that don't matter, that isn't strictly true. I mean, that is a sort of self-derisory remark for the academic sector in some ways. Academics is fundamentally about building representations of the world, representations which are necessarily selective, which discard some aspects of reality and retain others. Much of the current hubris, for example, about big data analytics is in many senses delusional. The source is an operation of bias that we heard about in terms of social media presentations in are largely unknown. We do see these kinds of collaborations are actually sort of putting data-rich representations of the totality of reality on a much firmer footing. And the kinds of master's projects that you can peruse at your leisure over lunch are but one sort of building block towards that broader and now much more strategic goal. Thanks very much.
So I took Keith's steer on timings, which was we did initially have an hour and 20 minutes for lunch, but Keith said that did give us a little bit of buffer, but he did imply that kind of anything much after 1 o'clock was taking the mickey with the size of the buffer. But I think that just does leave us 2 or 3 minutes for questions, if people do have any questions for any of our speakers. Or alternatively, everybody's just hungry. Aha, we have a question.
Nikki Tarry, Department for Work and Pensions. I'm interested in any lessons that you've learned from this work on picking up on the segmentation issue, which sometimes the public sector screams out risk of social exclusion, postcode lottery. So I know that won't have happened in the projects you've done, and it's always a problem for us with, well, hopefully hasn't, looking at some of the faces. It's always a problem for us when we get requests for our data. Is that a risk in using it? And it can lead to a barrier when we are asked to engage with commercial organisations on data sharing, and has led to to such work being excluded from some activities going on. So what lessons have you learnt around the segmentation and avoidance of social exclusion?
I guess that may be directed at me. I think most immediately to hold our tongues. We recently completed the output area classification for ONS based on 2011 census data, and I don't know, I'm the sort of person, I like listening to the Pet Shop Boys. I like, I pick, sort of pen portraits based on Pet Shop Boys songs, aspiring but misfiring, single, bilingual, white van culture, I don't know, etc., etc. A lot of our work is very heavily sanitized in terms of the way that it's actually portrayed, without diminishing the fundamental sort of data-led message that underpins it.
Any more? No, in which case, once again, a thank you to all the speakers this morning. I'm going to, yes.